Get in-depth analysis of the important news of the day. Spotlight on day's newsmakers. Expert comments to dissect the news. Get the finer points of the matter. Watch Dateline 5 p.m. on weekdays on DD India.
We have former India coach Harendra Singh as our guest today.
This World Cup, definitely Indian team is going to get one medal. Now it's a player duty to decide which color they want actually in the home cup. Combination of the team is fantastic. The experience is fantastic. If you see the Akashdeep, Sirjes is playing fourth World Cup, Akashdeep is playing third World Cup, Lalit Upadhyay is playing now, Mandeep is there. So these are the players who have to take the responsibility.
Are we winning the World Cup after 47 years?
23-24, India is definitely will be in the podium in the World Cup and in the Paris Olympics.
Welcome. It is 7:30 in the evening in India and we are back again with a spotlight on G20. Today is the final day of the Voice of Global South Summit, and so on India at G20 today we ask, can India as G20 chair help build a global South sensitive model of globalization as suggested by India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar in his remarks to the Voice of Global South Summit. India's initiative to take the voice of the Global South to the G20 forum so that their concerns and priorities get redressal that they urgently need. We'll also tell you about the major announcements made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi in his address to the summit today. I'm Munman Bhattacharya. First up, the top stories. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addresses concluding leaders a session of Voice of Global South Summit, calls for human-centric globalization, announces India will establish Global South Center of Excellence for exchanging research on development solutions and best practices, announces Global South Science and Technology Initiative to share expertise with other developing nations, and a new Arogya Maitri project to provide essential medical supplies to developing countries. External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar addresses Foreign Minister's session on G20. Suggestions for India's presidency. Says as G20 chair, India will articulate an agenda that will prioritize a new globalization paradigm focused on vulnerable populations and decentralization and bringing down walls and accessing opportunities around the world. Union Health Minister Mansukh Mandavia chairs the Health Minister's session on cooperation to build resilient healthcare systems. Says in tune with its philosophy of Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, India offered CoWIN as digital public health good to the world. Says soon to be launched Heal in India initiative will provide value-based healthcare for patients from across the world. Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan says India looks forward to partner and share developmental experiences with Global South for global growth, reiterates India's commitment to achieve the goal of universal education and human resource development at the Education Minister's session of Voice of Global South Summit. Union Petroleum and Natural Gas Minister Hardeep Singh Puri proposes to create Global Biofuel Alliance under G20, invites countries of the Global South to join India-led initiatives such as International Solar Alliance, One Sun, One World, One Grid and First India Energy Week in Bengaluru. Union Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal addresses Voice of Global South Summit, calls for new partnerships and mechanisms to reflect Voice of Global South on the decision-making table, stresses on building resilient supply chains and avoiding monopolization of supply of certain minerals and critical rare earth elements. Envoys of countries comprising Global South welcome India's initiative to host the first ever Voice of Global South Summit to channelize their voice in the G20 discourse. Terms the summit as India's meaningful contribution to the future of nations comprising Global South. On first day of its two-day Inception conference, Think 20 hosts multiple conferences and discussions on policy issues relevant to the G20. Experts brainstorm on finding consensus on global well-being, life, energy transitions and SDGs. Addressing the concluding session of the Voice of Global South Summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed that there is the urgent need of fundamental reform of major international organizations. He announced that India will establish a Global South Center of Excellence. Listen in.
India will establish a Global South Center of Excellence. This institution will undertake research on development solutions or best practices of any of our countries, which can be scaled and implemented in other members of the Global South. As an example, the digital public goods developed by India in fields like electronic payments, health, education, or e-governance can be useful for many other developing countries.
And for perspective, let's get on board with us former Secretary, Economic Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, Ambassador Rahul Chhabra. Ambassador Chhabra, welcome to India at G20. So there are several announcements that the Prime Minister made, and one of them was that India will be establishing a Global South Center of Excellence for exchanging research of developmental solutions and best practices so that they can be applied in respective countries. How significant is this announcement to your mind?
Good evening, Munmun. Thank you for having me on your show. It's a very significant announcement because India has, Prime Minister himself mentioned about the areas where India has expertise, but what many of us don't realize that among the 120 countries of Global South that we are focusing on, all of them also have their areas of expertise. So if we could collaborate with each other, and these are really solutions made for the Global South. So, so it's not really the solutions that are available in the Western world, as we call it, which are really applicable to India, so or to the rest of the Global South. So this is a very big initiative where we will be able to exchange these sort of solutions and scalable solutions. That's the whole idea, that these solutions can be replicated and scaled up, and they will be relevant solutions to our issues.
Absolutely. In fact, India has been carrying these forward. The tradition of sharing developmental experiences is a decade-old effort of India. We'll come back to you, Ambassador Chhabra. Let's listen in to what else the Prime Minister had to say first. So the Prime Minister announced several other initiatives as well. For instance, the Prime Minister announced Global South Science and Tech Initiative to share expertise with other developing nations as well. Can we listen in to the Prime Minister, please?
We will launch a Global South Science and Technology Initiative to share our experience, to share our expertise with other developing nations. During the COVID pandemic, India's Vaccine Maitri initiative supplied made in India vaccines to over 100 nations. I would now like to announce a new Arogya Maitri project. Under this project, India will provide essential medical supplies to any developing country affected by natural disasters or humanitarian crisis. For synergizing our diplomatic voice, I propose a Global South Young Diplomats Forum to connect youthful officers to our foreign ministries. India will also institute Global South scholarships for students from developing countries to pursue higher education in India.
Right, Ambassador Chabra, so a host of initiatives announced by the Prime Minister in the realm of inviting students from the Global South to study in India as far as higher education is concerned, in the realm of health and wellness particularly, and also in the realm of science and technology. Is this in the real sense what human-centric development is, which the Prime Minister has repeatedly been talking about?
Yes, exactly. This is what has been sort of lacking, this sort of focus on sharing each other's initiatives. Where we have done well, we put that across, and of course our strengths are there, as Prime Minister mentioned, in science and technology, space, nuclear. It's also in medicines, the Arogya Maitri initiative. It's a great takeoff from the Vaccine Maitri initiative, where over 100 countries receive vaccines from us, and over 150 countries receive medicines also at that time. So now we are committing to provide this to any other countries which may face any sort of either natural disaster or a health emergency. Then this training of diplomats. I mean, people don't really realize that at several of the multilateral organizations, we talk to each other, we discuss with each other, we are frequently in contact with each other to consolidate our positions. So getting sort of a global forum of that nature to meet them, interact with them is a great initiative. And the last one, the Global South scholarships also. You mentioned about our sharing. Just to recap, it goes back to 1964 when the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program was set up. So it was started in a very small manner, but now Prime Minister has really taken it to an entirely different scale, level and scope. The way he's expanded the program.
Right. And the External Affairs Minister had earlier called for a new globalization paradigm. What should that paradigm be to your mind?
The way globalization had gone on over the last few years, maybe a decade and plus, it had really sort of reached a stage of now what people were calling hyper-globalization. So everything had got so globalized that when the COVID pandemic struck, when we realized that concentration of supply chains in certain geographies, the entire thing could be disrupted and bring everything to a halt. So it is time to sort of focus that it's not just globalization is not just there that who can make more money. There is this human aspect to it. After all, we are all here sort of trying to live decently, comfortably. So there's no point in having globalization where one set of people are benefiting so much and most importantly leaving the other set of people behind. So the paradigm really has to be collectively taking everyone along, as the Prime Minister has made this focus as one earth, one family and one future, as there is no plan B or planet B. There is only this planet that we need to sort of look after. So this globalization had sort of gone on too far and too much ahead and left a lot of people behind, and we were beginning to see the impact of that. So if we can have a course correction at this moment, it will really sort of change the nature of how we go forward in the coming decades. Global growth, global thought processes, it'll have to come with that. Firstly, the thinking, people putting across these ideas that there is this alternative way, there's a different way of doing it, and that may be a better way to go ahead.
And the External Affairs Minister had yesterday called for a form of globalization that is sensitive to the concerns and priorities of the Global South. He put it as building a Global South sensitive model of globalization. For that to happen, is reform of multilateral institutions like the United Nations Security Council a must?
It is a must because that is what has been lacking. It's not only the UN Security Council, the Bretton Woods institutions. So all these institutions that were set up nearly 8 decades back, they've continued in their sort of similar format and the similar voting rights and the same focus. So unless that changes, and the voice of the global south, as is coming out now, they have concerns which are concerns of, by the way, 3/4 of humanity. So if these concerns are not addressed, you cannot really keep going forward, because they aren't even talking about these issues. So unless these systems of governance are more representative to represent today's world, wherein India has become the 5th largest economy, it is other countries are also growing in that sense. So these sort of institutions need adjustment. But of course, status quos, the members who are there are reluctant to give up their privileges. But the sooner they realize that they need to incorporate the concerns of the others, the better that we can go forward, and that will involve reform of these institutions.
Ambassador Chhabra, the External Affairs Minister, today called for a consensus on a green development pact of G20 leaders. We've seen the lack of progress on the issue of sharing of either climate finance or climate technology. What could be this green development pact of G20 leaders? What shape could it take? Because there is a simultaneous process that happens year after year of COPs. So how significant could this be?
Yes, you're right. The COPs is going to happen in Dubai at the end of the year, whereas this summit will be in September. So there's going to be a good prelude to that. But exactly, that's the issue. The green technology is available, but it's priced so high that none of the really countries of the global south can afford that technology. So then comes in the issue of climate financing. Or if the technology is sort of given as a free good, something like we did with the vaccine. I mean, we didn't really price the vaccine in the manner we could have priced it, because it was our invention, we were making it, but we gave it out to the world as a global good. So I think the world is sort of tending to realize that this cannot go on and on, especially the sort of incidents that are now happening in the global environment, wherein we are having these killer cyclones and hurricanes and floods and completely devastating sort of heat waves and then cold waves. So the world is sort of realizing, changing, and the technologies exist. I mean, human mind is really capable of coming up with solutions, and these solutions are there, but they're so expensive. So the sooner we move towards that direction, and I think we are sort of going there, but maybe it's a bit slow at the moment. Hopefully, with this India taking the lead in putting up this up front, putting it up and center on the agenda, so people are forced to confront these issues and come up with realistic sort of solutions. So that's where India's role comes in, because India is really the voice of the global south, because and even earlier people used to expect and want India to sort of stand up. So India has been doing that right across, and this is another forum where hopefully it will work.
An announcement that was made by the Union Health Minister, Mr. Mandavia, was of a G20 global initiative on digital health, which will prioritize the digital agenda. India has been leveraging digital public infrastructure for financial inclusion. India has been sharing that as a best practices. CoWIN has been an open platform. Interested countries were allowed to use CoWIN for their vaccination programs, just like India was using it successfully for its. So do you think that this particular initiative will build on such efforts?
Yes, definitely. The CoWIN was just one of the initiatives, but all the other, even the financial DigiStack that we have, there are several of these Ayushman Bharat. I mean, they are all online sort of platforms which can sort of completely transform the situation in the global south. So they are looking for solutions like this, and the most importantly, which are accessible freely, not really at the prices that the rest of the world sort of charges. So that is where India steps in. It is as I said, a solution made for the global south at an affordable price, and even the technology is sort of the layman who could use it. So these are solutions that are exactly meant for these sort of situations.
Another announcement in terms of a proposal that was made was by our Energy Minister, Hardeep Puri. He proposed to create a global biofuel alliance under G20 in view of the concerns and insecurity around the world vis-a-vis energy security because of the pandemic, the supply chains getting disrupted, and because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What could this entail, and how can this provide energy security at this point in time?
Biofuel, as you know, has been used quite extensively over the last few years, particularly in Latin America. Brazil is a great pioneer in that. India is sort of getting into the game in biofuel in a big way now, and it's time we got in. And there are many other alternatives also. But since you are focusing on biofuel, it's a great alternative to sort of get onto. So it would again involve sort of pushing this putting it on the agenda firstly, and then incentivizing people to start using it, and then showing it as a role model to the rest of the global south that look, this is going to work, because the fuel insecurity is not going to go. It's always been there sort of, but now with the Ukraine crisis, it's again sort of exacerbated that, but it will come back in some way or the other, because most of the global south does not have access to these sort of the fossil fuels. So we are all sort of dependent on imports, and we don't have the sort of financial resources to pay the prices that these fossil fuels have reached. And of course, in terms of climate change also, it's a negative. So the biofuels initiative is a good initiative, which should sort of help resolve that issue.
Okay, coming back to the issue of health, because the Union Health Minister spoke about the need for long-term measures to build stronger and more resilient health systems. But while domestic efforts are required and also international efforts, you also require the developed world to understand the perspective of the global south at, say, the WTO when it asks for a full-fledged TRIPS waiver, isn't it?
That's right. So India and South Africa had pushed that initiative. Unfortunately, there were some countries who were sort of reluctant to let it go through, but there were others that were sort of in favor of it. So all these things don't happen overnight. I mean, they all take time. You put the proposal forward, people see the impact of it. Some people come onto your side. Sometime later, there are others. People talk to each other. So, you know, these things take time, but of course, it has been taking too much time. So it's time to speed up that process. But I think the trajectory is there. People are understanding the concerns, and the more India puts it forward with initiatives like this conference, wherein we got the support of over 120 countries. And just by the way, just to for you to know the background of the countries who came, I mean the neighbors, there was Bangladesh, there was ASEAN, there was Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, there was Central Asia, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, there was Africa, West Africa, Senegal, East Africa, Mozambique, Caribbean, there was Guyana, Australasia, there was Papua New Guinea. So you see, it was worldwide. It was not that this global south is just sort of focused in one geographical area. So it had a pretty huge coverage. So when this sort of something comes out of a conference like this, everybody takes note of it.
Absolutely. And I was listening to Dharmendra Pradhan as well, the education minister, and he called for sharing of best practices on a whole range of issues like human resource development, capacity building, building a future-ready workforce, digital public goods in education, and skilling and vocational education. Does India have a lot of experience, and will India, to your mind, also be looking at sharing experiences and also incorporating the best practices of other countries in these sectors?
Exactly. So while we do have strengths in education, but maybe in skilling, not that much. So we need to sort of see what the other countries are doing. That's a big focus of Prime Minister Modi, to skill our workforce. We have been trying to do it to the best possible. But if there are other models available, they need to be looked at and brought out. So there's enough we can learn from the others, and so can they learn from us. It's just that information is not available. It's skewed. So the Western world sort of puts out their proposals. Everybody seems to think that that is the best option available and sort of tries to follow that. That may not necessarily be true.
Ambassador Chabra, if you can hear me, how do you look at the overall idea which India has not only proposed or conceptualized, but now also implemented with the two-day Voice of Global South Summit, because this, many would believe, is a path-breaking initiative. There were hints to that effect in the addresses by External Affairs Minister, that considering the past G20 summits and the present global order, it was incumbent upon a country like India to come up with something like this, and India has answered the call of the global south to hold such a summit in a sense. So how significant is such an initiative, and how much will it help the global south?
It's a very significant initiative because, as External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar mentioned, the G20 summit, some of which I have participated in, by the way, a few years back, has a pretty clear and a narrow focus. So it doesn't at all incorporate the sort of issues that were brought out in this summit of the Voice of the Global South. So having this right in the beginning of our presidency sort of helps us also and gives us the heft and the backing that, look, when we are speaking on behalf of the 120 countries who have attended that, and these are all ideas that have been thrown up and thought about by these people, and they would like us to sort of express it to the G20, which is sort of now becoming a very critical forum for formulating global rules on governance and taking forward initiatives. So we need to sort of focus on where 3/4 of humanity is thinking about, rather than just the 25% that is represented inside which is not part of the global south.
And also, I would like to, take your thoughts to what the Prime Minister had said while addressing the summit yesterday. He spoke about how the principle of CBDR, which is common but differentiated responsibilities, is a principle that should apply to all challenges facing the global south. Traditionally, we've seen it being spoken about in the context of combating climate change alone. Do you think that this could be a touchstone to resolve the various concerns and priorities if this is taken as a common principle?
Yes, it will be quite revolutionary, because even in the environment field, it took some time for the world to sort of realize. India was pushing this for over a decade or two, the CBDR, and finally, I mean, the world is beginning to realize that. So, as the Prime Minister said, I mean, the problems that the world is facing today, or the global south is facing, are not of its making. So these are all problems that have been sort of created by the rest of the world, and now the global south is being greatly impacted and maybe disproportionately impacted by these problems. So putting the responsibility a bit back on the people who sort of created the problem in the first place is, yes, it's quite a good idea, and we hope that the world takes it in the right spirit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ambassador Shabra, for sharing your perspective on the Voice of Global South Summit, a key summit conceptualized and now implemented by India under the leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. These inputs of the Global South leaders, over 120 leaders of the Global South participated in the summit. This was the largest gathering virtually of the Global South leaders under India's leadership, and their inputs are going to be now channelized in the G20 discourse. With that, we come to the close of this edition of India at G20. Thanks for watching.
सर, आपका केवाईसी अपडेट करना है, नहीं तो अकाउंट और एटीएम कार्ड ब्लॉक हो जाएगा।
सावधान, सावधान।
2.5 करोड़ का इनाम मुझे। देखिए, अनजाने कॉल्स, फर्जी ईमेल्स, लिंक्स और जाली ऐप से अपना पिन, ओटीपी, पासवर्ड कभी भी किसी के साथ शेयर न करें। आप रहेंगे सावधान तो नहीं होगा नुकसान।